the whole stop the spread argument, Aaron, was there any basis for it at all?
The vaccine was never tested, clinical trial, for whether or not it stopped transmission. And by the way, that's true for pretty much all vaccines. The FDA has, will tell you as much. And most vaccines don't stop transmission. And the premise should have been that it doesn't stop transmission, frankly, and until proven otherwise. Because when you look at respiratory viruses and respiratory vaccines, they don't stop transmission pretty much. And so, and many of them don't stop transmission. So, when you look at some of the raw data regarding other vaccines, it shouldn't have been very surprising. You're trying to inject something in the arm that often will create systemic immunity in your blood, IgG antibodies, to try and create mucosal immunity in your lungs, IgA antibodies. And that crossover typically does not happen in science. So it should have started with, well, this is almost certainly not going to create immunity transmission. And I could walk through some of the other vaccines as well. But, if I was one of your audience members, I might be saying, I still don't believe 5 days of safety review for the clinical trials. And, if you want, I could pull up the FDA website and I could show you one or two of those just so that folks at home who are watching this actually believe it, because I wouldn't believe it without seeing it personally.
So this is the yes, I'd love to see that, Aaron. And this is the FDA's own website, their own information, in which it's made explicitly clear that the follow-up for some of these vaccines is just 5 days. So if they go and see someone, if they check in on someone 5 days later and they're not coughing up blood, the project is declared a success.
Well, the way to think, yes, that's close, but the way to think about it is this. When you want to license a product, okay, you have to do a clinical trial. And why are clinical trials so critically important? They're critically important because it's the only time that's considered ethical with a vaccine to give one group the vaccine and one group nothing, a placebo, and then compare them. Because once it's licensed, they say, oh, it's unethical to withhold the vaccine now from any child. So the clinical trial is critically important to show the safety. Because after licensure, all you can really do are what's known as retrospective epidemiological study, okay? And they will tell you, the epidemiologists and the scientific community will tell you, you can't prove causation with those studies. You can just show correlation, not causation. How do you prove causation? If somebody comes to our firm and says, hey, I believe this product caused this injury, and I want to show causal connection, I need typically clinical trial data. So that's why the clinical trials are so critical. And those safety review periods that we just looked at and the controls, okay, those are from the clinical trials. When you want to license a product, the company that wants to license it conducts the clinical trial, not the FDA, not any European or UK health authorities. The company conducts the trial. It then submits that data to the regulatory authority. They decide then whether to license it. What are you submitting? Clinical trial. How do you evaluate whether a clinical trial is good? Number one, how long did you review safety? If you didn't look at it long enough, if you got a baby, you only followed in the clinical trial safety for 5 days. Most immune issues might not come up for a few years of age, like asthma, developmental issues for numerous years of age. Even like autoimmunity, think about it like this. If I give you a vaccine and I say you're going to get immunity to a certain antigen in the product, that will often, they tell you, take many weeks or months. So if you're going to have self-attacking antibodies, that will at least take weeks or months, not 5 days. It's not going to show up in 5 days. So how long? That's criteria one. Second, well, what are you comparing it against? Because even if I review safety for a long time, but I don't have a placebo control group or another control group where I really understand the safety profile, how do I know it's safe? What am I comparing it against? The background rate? It's really hard to do that. And then finally, the third factor is you got to have enough people in the trial. Okay. Hope I'm not boring your audience with this. The third criteria is you got to have enough people to what they epidemiologists would call it has to be well powered. Because if you don't have enough people, then you're not going to detect signals. If you only have a few thousand kids, well, then you're only going to detect conditions that happen, 1 in 1,000, 1 in a few hundred, meaning you're not going to catch rare things. And when you're injecting this into millions of kids, and it requires giving often, let's say, 8,000, 9, 20, 30,000 vaccines to prevent one case of disease, well, you better be safer than that number. It's called the number 2 treat. So if the number 2 treat is 20,000 injections to stop one adverse event from the underlying disease, well, you better make sure the product's safer than 1 in 20,000 adverse events. So you got to be properly powered for that. Okay, with that said, what we're going to look at is what was the clinical trial? What were the features of the clinical trial that the company relied upon, that the FDA relied upon to license this product? What did they accept? And in that chart, I'll share my screen again. So we're back to this chart again, right? And that's what it means by safe follow-up. So let's take a look at the first one on the list, hepatitis B vaccine. That's the very first licensed childhood vaccine. And if we go to Google and we go to FDA licensed vaccines, so here we are. We're now going to click on the first link, vaccines licensed for use in the United States. On this webpage is every single vaccine's licensed for use in the United States. These are not very dissimilar for the ones in Europe as well. I understand sometimes they have different brand names and so forth. And if we scroll down, we will find there are 4 hepatitis B vaccines licensed in the United States. Okay. Only 2 of these are licensed for babies. The other 2 are only for adults. The first one, Recomavax HB, is the one that was licensed. It was licensed actually in 1986. And when we pull up the package insert, and I don't know what it's like in the UK or in other parts of the world, but in the United States, when you get a drug, there's usually a piece of paper in the box.
Yes.
And when you open it, it becomes very big, huge, right?
Yeah, really easy to read. They make it entertaining. There's cartoon characters. It's a very appealing document.
Definitely there must be very different than where you are than the ones we have, but those definitely sound more exciting. But under federal regulations, section 6.1, I'll scroll down, require that the manufacturer summarize the clinical trial relied upon to license that product vis-a-vis safety. Perfect. So there's a simple way to look at the clinical trial. I'm about to inject this into my baby, okay? Now, before I go and buy a car, I kick the tires, I ask a few questions before I do my homework, right? Before you buy any product, even you go to Amazon, you're going to buy like a camera. You're going to do some research. Before you inject something into your baby, if you want to start by looking at what was the safety, how did they determine it's safe? This is probably the place to start, I would say.
Yes.
And we'll scroll down to 6.1. And right here, we will see this is all of the text of section 6.1. These were the reactions reported in the clinical trial. Section 6.2 is the post-marketing safety. So this sentence summarizes the clinical trial relied upon to license this product for children.
434 doses were administered to 147 infants and children up to 10 years of age who were monitored for 5 days after each dose. So that product being issued after it's only been given to 147 kids, and they've done less than 500 doses, and their follow-up period is 5 days. That's not even really a clinical trial. I reckon I could get together a trial of that standard from previous partners. Most coffee out there is basically the liquid equivalent of a participation trophy. Bland, mass-produced, utterly forgetful. But peaberry beans, they're not here to play nice. You get yourself that peaberry, you'll know you've been caffeinated. It's 1775, baby. These rare little rebels make up less than 10% of the entire coffee harvest. Instead of sticking to the crowd, they grow solo, resulting in a denser, more intense bean that doesn't just follow the herd. These beans are grown at high altitudes and are hand-picked at their peak, because if you're going to do something, do it right, yeah? Do them beans right. Thanks to their unique solo act, peaberries deliver richer flavors, a smoother finish, and a touch more caffeine to keep you sharp and focused, like the universe intended. This isn't your corporate coffee sludge. This is for those who see through the nonsense and demand a cup that's as real as it gets. Why settle for anything less than the sweetest peaberries, those rarest among beans? So if you're tired of sipping on mediocrity, go to 1775coffee.com. Use my special code BRAND to get 15% off. Don't just wake up properly to 1775. Revolutionary coffee in the revolution against mediocrity.
Now, I just want to remind everybody, we're on the FDA website. Last I checked, not an anti-vaxxer organization, I think. And this is a FDA-approved document. This is Merck's summation of it. And I will tell you, the first time I saw this, I actually said, it can't be. It cannot be that a product that you're going to inject into millions of babies was licensed based on 5 days of safety monitoring after injection, that there's got to be more. So we actually submitted something called a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA request. That's a law in the United States that allows us to get documents from the federal government here. And we asked on behalf of our client, the Informed Consent Action Network, ICANN, we asked for all of the clinical trial reports that were submitted to license, thinking there's got to be more in there. And we got copies of all of them. And they're on the ICANN website. Anybody can go see them. And it's 5 days. And in fact, we then even petitioned the FDA and the formal docketing system that Merck and Pfizer and companies would use to license or to modify licensures to say, hey, Congress said you should only license products that are shown to be safe. Now, we can debate whether the safety review period, how many kids need to be, and what the control should be, right? We could debate those things maybe in the margins. Should it be 100,000 kids, 50,000 kids? Should it be 5 years, 3 years? But 5 days with 147 kids, and what was the control? Right, there's none listed. This is useless. It's utterly and completely useless to determining safety. So the company, they did this, Merck got this on the market with the absolute minimal safety data that they could obtain. And if somebody out there will say to you, well, maybe they already knew it was safe because, and these are the arguments I often hear in return. Well, they knew it was safe because there was probably other Hep B, V vaccines. This is the very first recombinant DNA technology vaccine in the universe. Just like the very first mRNA vaccine was COVID, the very first recombinant DNA technology vaccine ever was this hepatitis B vaccine in the United States. And there was, at that point, there had been a prior Hep B vaccine made actually with literal human blood. Nobody wanted to take it, so that went away. So there's no precedent safety profile. The other argument I often hear is, yeah, well, but they probably really tested it in adults well. Well, let's just scroll down just right to this sentence, and we could see how they tested it in adults. 1,200 people, so better a little bit, but still completely underpowered. And again, only 5 days safety monitoring. And again, you can see the clinical trial reports. So, I've deposed vaccinologists, immunologists, pediatricians, and I've asked about this a million times. I've waited there is no response to this. There's no good response to this. If you think there's something else, send it to me. I'd love to see it because that's what there is in terms of what was lied upon to license this product.
Aaron, these trials are so sort of negligibly small that it can hardly really be referred to as science. It's almost like a bureaucratic exercise in order to achieve license. I remember reading during the pandemic period that booster shots were being recommended after they'd been trialed on like 5 mice. And I think what concerns me most of all is when my intuitive sense turns out to be correct. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember thinking, how can these products have been effectively trialed? Because there hasn't been a trial period sufficient to know how these are going to impact people in a year or in 5 years. And also, what pregnant women are going to put themselves forward for clinical trials, and what parents are going to allow their children to be clinically trialed. These were the kind of things that just occurred to me. So to see it backed up and to see it having been sieved through your legal mind as scrutiny, and that my general ruminations were somewhat correct, suggests that there's such a degree of institutional corruption that the science that they always use to verify their mandates, their actions, their policies, their profits is actually a subset of commercial imperatives and incentives that are themselves so corrupt it might as well be a religion, and at that a fallen and broken religion, rather than science as we sort of conversationally understand it, empiricism, clinical trial, fact.
The claims made about vaccines often are dogma, religious beliefs. I mean, the idea that vaccines are the most robustly trialed products on the market is just simply false. And again, you don't take my word for it. Go to the FDA website. We just did it for the hepatitis B vaccine. Pull it up for every single other childhood vaccine. Look at section 6.1. They also have the underlying clinical trial reports for a lot of them. Take a look at it. I will tell you, I can't claim to have any genius superpowers as a person or a lawyer to have done this. I literally just went to Google and I searched FDA licensed vaccines, and you can pull them up, and it's right there for the taking. But it's true. Most people will it's almost like an incantation. Safe and effective, safe and effective. the most robustly studied products on the market, the most safely studied. They're safety reviewed for years.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.